So, Ajahn Brahmali, what have we learnt and what have we not learned? I was more worried about what we haven't learned. So what we learnt that the Satipatthana Sutta has been revived, revisited, cut and pasted. There are so many versions. And it can be somewhat confusing, and this confusion may well lead to a confused faith. So, in the spirit of returning to the source, hoping the message will go to those who are struggling with understanding what is right, and for that we need to go back to the original teachings. So we're very grateful for your contribution to clarifying doubt around that. We felt it was very helpful to understand that right mindfulness requires the preliminary 6 or 7 factors of the Noble Eightfold path. It is about developing stillness and letting go, achieving samadhi, understanding hindrances and the positive factors of the mind. But in saying that, the more and more, and I know personally, the more and more I understand, the more I feel I understand less and less. So it's a wonderful journey. Some of us have been on the path for less than a year and are just so glad to be here. And particularly hearing the teachings around the difference between sense restraint and Satipatthana, and understanding that sense restraint is a day-to-day proposition, i.e. the first 1 to 6 of the Eightfold Path. Satipatthana is more in the realm of meditation, that development of samadhi, as you say. It feels like a second home to be here. The coffee and food are great reminders of sensory distractions. So well played. Reading the text is one thing, but hearing it is quite another. And it's up to us to understand clearly and decide what we will and won't take on. Some of us have always had a suspicion about other styles of meditation, particularly the Goenka Vipassana tradition and its attitude towards pain. And I know for a few of us it was good to know that the Satipatthana does not delve into pain. So our instincts were right. It's not about sitting with pain. It's the absence of pain. And, I don't know what I don't know, and there's probably an awful lot of it. Then we moved on to just, with some suggestions again, I guess, of what we'd like to focus more on and where to from here. So some ideas were more of an understanding about what is required outside of meditation, so in day-to-day life, I guess, to empower our meditation practice. It'd be nice to hear more on the gradual training, and I would pop in there the Mangala Sutta, more on sense restraint and the factors of awakening, the bojjhangas, and what helps the mind to settle and grow these factors. We were quite interested in some more instruction around contemplation after samadhi, but it was quite comforting to understand that although we may not reach the jhanic states, we can be still enough to start to see some insights. So some instructions on how to do contemplations once we have reached that place of stillness would be good. We appreciated the untangling of the Satipatthana and everything else, understanding what has been taken from the other suttas, particularly the contemplations, and then being able to feel like we can choose what we need to do based on our circumstances. So if we were to study the contemplations, or if we were to contemplate systematically on those factors, we might choose to do that for a week or a month. There's different ways. Some people like to be intuitive and sort of take what they feel they need. Others are a bit more scattergun. But I think all in all, there was a suggestion we'd like to hear more about the factors of awakening, the Bhojangas. And finally, there was just a point of clarification requested around the 5 khandhas. I think we got there, but with the first 4, it's relatively easy to see the arising and passing. You can see how they arise, you can see how they would vanish. But when you get to something like consciousness, when understanding is eye consciousness, ear consciousness, it's a little bit more difficult to see the vanishing. So that's what we chatted about.
Wow. Whoa.
And we were quick.
We were quick. That's amazing. Wow. Eddie was missing in action. Wow, that was amazing what you covered. Okay, that's great. So, just to comment briefly here on those things. And first of all, I can understand that it might be a bit confusing when you start pulling the suttas apart and trying to figure out what is early and not early. And I think a lot of the time, what you know already, most of the things you know already will be right. So there's a kind of just marginal adjustments on how to understand the suttas. So don't take on board the things that you understand that make sense to you, and allow these things kind of gradually to evolve and to broaden your understanding. The idea with a course like this is to go into a little bit of depth. That's the whole point of it. And very often there will be things that should challenge you a little bit, otherwise there would be no point in this kind of course. So there should be some things that seem a bit challenging and unusual. And it is, I have to say that this way of presenting the Satipatthana Sutta is not the way that you will normally see it pretty much anywhere else. It's a very different approach. And that comes from this idea of comparative study of the various versions. This is not an approach you find almost anywhere else. There are a few exceptions, but not many places you find this kind of approach. It's a very, it's a fairly new way of thinking about the suttas. But I find it very interesting, and I find it very useful, and I think that it leads to some very simple results, really, that are very applicable in daily life, and makes it very clear what stage of the path the various things belong to. I think this is one of the most important consequences of understanding it in the right way. So just allow things to unfold, and hopefully over time you will kind of grasp more what this is about. Please come up with this important business. Okay, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Very good. As for the points that you would like to hear more about, I would say that yes, it's important to focus on things like right effort. If people mention sense restraint, I agree this is very, very important and very significant part of the Buddhist path. We did a previous version or previous part of the workshop was actually on sense restraint in particular. So if you go back, or on right effort I should say, so we have dealt with right effort before. It was probably a little bit on the brief side. We could probably have done more on right effort, I have to admit, thinking back. But that's how things turned out. If you want to hear more about right effort, one of the ways of doing that is to come on one of my retreats. I talk about this in much more detail on the retreats, because that is where it is important to direct your mind in the right way so as to enable meditation to happen. But I agree, this is a very important part of the path because it's what enables the meditation. Right view as well, a very important part of this. And of course, right view and right effort are in some ways very closely linked to each other. Through right effort you get right view, and through right view you get right effort. They kind of work with each other. So certainly, I think that's a very important point. And as for the 7 factors of awakening, which was also mentioned, indeed they are very important, and these are actually we're going to come to them very soon because they are part of the Satipatthana Sutta. So I will discuss them in brief, not in great detail today because there just isn't enough time, but we'll discuss them in brief, what they mean and what they are. Apart from that, there have been talks given on these things before. talks about what is sometimes called the dependent liberation, for example, which is just one particular angle on the idea of the factors of awakening here. There's many, very interesting in the suttas. What you often find is that a certain topic is approached from many different angles. So what I call the gradual or dependent liberation is just one way of thinking about the Bojjhangas. Anapanasati Sutra is very closely linked as well to the Bojjhangas. If you look at the Anapanasati Sutra and you put the Bojjhangas, the factors of awakening, put them next to each other, you can see the parallels going through. And so maybe we can look at that afterwards when we get to it. So, good. So thank you for the feedback. It's good to kind of know what you would like to hear more about, and so maybe we can talk about these topics more in the future. But now let's come back to the Satipatthana Sutta, and we have looked at, just finished looking at the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates, or the 5 aspects of a personality, as I like to call them. And we're now going to look at the 6 sense spheres. These are the salayatana in Pali. So contemplation of the 6 sense spheres. And as always, we're going to look at the comparison of the sources, first of all. And it is as follows. So you can see here, this is found in more sources than the khandhas. The khandhas were aggregates only found in one source, the Pali, whereas this one is found in a number of sources. It's not found in 3, but found in 4. So a majority of sources just has the sense spaces. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean that they are maybe a little bit more closely linked to the idea of hindrances and that sort of thing. Yeah, so they are a little bit more linked to the idea of bringing the mind to samadhi. But overall, it would seem this also probably is a slightly later addition, probably not part of the earliest sutta, I would say, based on this comparison. Although this is marginally less sure because it exists in a number of versions. So let's have a quick look at the 6 sense spaces, the salayatana. And so here we go. It's when a monastic, or layperson for that matter, understands the eye, sights, and the fetter that arises dependent on both of these. So when we talk about the salayatana, the word ayatana means something like, almost like a plane. Ayatana means like a stretching out. So it's like a sphere of something, a plane of something. It's like when you look out into the world, it's like the plane of all sights, if you like, the sphere of all sights. And it has 2 aspects to it. There is the internal ayatana, ajata ayatana, and the bahira ayatana. Bahira is external. And the internal is the actual sense itself. The fact that we have an eye, you have an ear, so you have the ability to experience these things. And then there is the sight itself, the phenomenon that you see at any particular time. And of course, these 2 things really go together. Whenever you have an experience, it brings these things together. The eye has to be there and the sight has to be there. The 2 things are you can't really pull them apart. They're part of the same process, eyes and sights. They're not really distinct because in terms of experience, they always come together. The difference is that sights are always changing, while the eye is kind of always there. And this is kind of the distinction. So the eye is more deeper, if you like, whereas sights are things that are changing. And the fetter that arises in dependence of both of them, well, the fetter here is the meaning of that which binds you. You are bound to these things. And that, of course, comes through desires. We'll see that in a second. Chanda, raga is the Pali term. Chanda means desire. Raga means like sensory desire, something like that. So they basically have the same meaning here. So that is the fetter. The fetter is always desire, always craving. So here you can have craving for 2 things, either for sights, Yeah, so when you have a craving or desire for a sight, it means that certain sights that you like, that you enjoy, yeah, you may crave those sights. And of course the same thing is true for the other senses. And yeah, you want to see people, you want to see whatever it is. That is the craving for sights. But then there is the more profound craving. And that is the craving for the eye itself. In other words, the craving for the ability to see. Yeah, and that is more profound and more difficult to give up, because the ability to see, if you give that up, it means the whole realm of sights is beyond you. So it's like becoming blind. Are you ready to become blind? Yeah, this is why people don't want to become blind, because it means the whole realm of sights is suddenly out of reach. So there's two different kinds of craving here. One is for the individual sights that you can see. The other one is actually for the ability to see itself, and that's different. And as you go through the meditation process, you have to get rid of both of these kinds of craving. There have to be individual sights that you have to say, okay, I have to give them up. That is not so hard usually. It gets more difficult maybe when it comes to the body. You want to kind of look after keep the body there. It depends on, hearing can be difficult. But what is more difficult is to actually give up the ability to see. And when you go into a deep state of meditation, that is essentially what you give up. You give up the access to seeing, the access to the eye, the access to sights altogether. And that is why deep meditation can be so hard, because it's almost as if you are going blind. Yeah, you're allowing yourself to go blind, and you don't know: am I going to come out of this state of samadhi, or am I not? Is it going to be permanent? That's why it's kind of scary to go into a state of samadhi, because you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. Well, you know, but you can't. It's like giving up the senses altogether. Yeah? So two different things there, and. This is why, I think, one reason why this is included here, more likely to be included than the five aggregates, because it relates more closely to the process of achieving samadhi. Yeah, because we have to give these things up to be able to achieve samadhi, really deep samadhi. So that's why it makes a bit more sense to have it here. But in the deepest sense, if you're going to look at the especially when it comes to the mind itself, we're talking also about insights, which actually leads to the very end of the path. Deep insights that have to do with non-self on the deepest level, and as such they are also go beyond samadhi as well. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Yeah, the eye and sight, slightly different, and then the fetter, the thing that binds you to these things, which is your attachment, your desires and cravings in relation to both of these. You understand how the fetter arises? How does the fetter arise? Well, we looked at this before. It's because you delight in certain sights, or you delight in the ability to see. Seeing, yay, I can see, hooray. And you're very happy about the ability to see. And if someone says, I'm going to make you blind, you say, no, thank you. I'm happy the way things are. So this is kind of holding on to that sight. Unless you have a state of samadhi, and then you understand that actually the sights of the world aren't all that interesting. It's more of the same. There's variations on the same theme, but actually seeing is a disturbance when it comes to samadhi. So you see the fetter, and then you understand how the fetter is abandoned by not delighting in that sight, understanding there's something better. That better happens when you gain deep meditation, and then you understand how the abandoned fetter does not arise again in the future. And again, this is where you practice deeply. You know that you see through the idea of a self. There's no sense of self in relation to this anymore, and at that point you kind of, just like the five khandhas, you can abandon these things completely, because that is the underlying problem which makes you desire these things. I am the seer, I am the whatever it is, and then it does not arise again in the future, the desire for these things. It's interesting when you read the sutras, you see sometimes about the Buddha or the Arahants. The Arahants are the fully awakened beings of the world, and you see they still delight in meditation practice. They still enter the jhana states. You see this in the suttas again and again. And you might think, well, why do the arahants bother with the jhanas? They are liberated. Well, basically, it is because the five senses are disturbing. There's so much activity going on. They prefer that peaceful state of jhanas, even though you're fully awakened. That is a preferable state. You enter these things. You don't crave those things. You don't have big desire for them, but you still have a preference for them, which is a kind of a distinction there. So, okay. Going a little bit faster than before because we have quite a bit to go through still. And so this tells you about what the fetter. I said the fetter is the desire, this particular sutta says that the I is not the fetter of forms, nor the forms the fetter of the I. But rather the desire and want that arises in dependence on both. That is the fetter there. So the fetter is not the I, so we don't have to eliminate the I, we don't have to eliminate forms. That's impossible. What we have to do instead is to eliminate the desire that arises dependent on both of these things. That is the fetter, that is the binding agent, the glue that glues you to dukkha. We are glued to dukkha. That's what the Buddha is saying. Bad news, isn't it? Being glued to dukkha. But that's kind of essentially what this is about. Fettered to dukkha, tied to suffering here, rejoicing in suffering. Okay, so just to make clear what the fetter means, and then we have the same thing for the other five senses. Always six senses in Buddhism. It's when a monastic or anyone understands the ear, sounds, noses and smells, the tongue and taste, the body and touches, the mind and thoughts, and the fetter that arises dependent on both. So it is especially when we come to the mind and thought that it gets really profound, because at that point we are coming to the very, not just achieving samadhi, but also going beyond samadhi. That's where the full insight into the nature of reality comes. Same as before, you understand how the fetter has not arisen, comes to arise, because you are delighting in these things. You enjoy them. You don't see the limits. You don't see the dukkha. You don't see the downside. If you saw the downside, the fetter would not arise. It would be abandoned. Fetter that has arisen comes to be abandoned, seeing the downside. And then eventually, through full insight, it does not arise again in the future, just like before. So, 6 sense bases, 6 sense spheres. Any comments on the sense spheres? No, good. Yeah. Okay, let's just carry on a little bit, because I'm just concerned that time is going to be too short, as always. There's no such thing as too much time. So we can take lots of questions towards the end if we have spare time. I was going to say, but there's no chance. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic. Next one is the contemplation of the 7 factors of awakening. So some of you were mentioning that before. And so again, we're going to compare the sources. And lo and behold, look at this. 7 factors of awakening. Exactly the same pattern as we see for the 5 hindrances. There's only the Prajnaparamita Sutta, which does not have this. And as mentioned before, it's a bit of an anomaly anyway, so not to worry too much about that. All the other sources have the 7 factors of awakening here. So this is, if anything, is a part of the earliest version of the Satipatthana. That this must be it. It's found everywhere. It goes back to the very earliest time. So 5 hindrances and 7 factors of awakening. And what you will see in a second is that the way these are explained is kind of in parallel to the five hindrances. They're explained in a similar kind of way. In other words, causality, that's why they're called Dhammas. So causality is a very important part of this. Actually, we saw the causality also in the sixth sense space that also has that kind of pattern, but it certainly occurs here with the 7 factors of awakening here. It's a very similar kind of thing. In fact, the 7 factors of awakening and the 5 hindrances, they form a pair almost throughout the sutras. 5 hindrances and the factors of awakening are like opposites almost. They counteract each other. So when the 5 hindrances are strong, the factors of awakening are weak. When the 5 hindrances are weak, the factors of awakening are stronger. They're almost like 2 sides of the same coin. Different ways of looking at the same mental content, if you like, or processes. So let's have a look at these 7 factors of awakening here. Probably not a bad time to look at the awakening factors right after the meal. Maybe it will be help us a little bit. So we have, it's when a monastic who has the awakening factor of mindfulness in them understands, I have the awakening factor of mindfulness in me. So you know what it means to be mindful. You have had enough experience to really understand these things. And again, the definition of this mindfulness factor of awakening in the sutras is actually the 4 Satipatthanas. You practice the 4 Satipatthanas, that is kind of begins the whole process of the awakening factors. So if you practice the Satipatthanas properly, with a mind that is clear, we talked about some of the, very early on, some of the qualities of real mindfulness, the idea of clarity, of presence, of, I can't remember exactly what I said there, clarity, presence. Anyway, it's the idea of being aware of what is happening in the present moment with a degree of clarity and not being distracted. And the more meditation you have done, the more idea you will have about what real mindfulness actually is, when the mind is not distracted by thinking and all of these kind of things. So one way of giving a rise to this mindfulness awakening factor is then practicing Satipatthana, which is breath meditation, right? But there are also other ways. One other way mentioned in the sutras is the Dhammanusati. Anusati is recollection. Dhamma, in this case, means the teachings of the Buddha. So if you can use the recollection of the teachings of the Buddha, reflecting on the sutras, reflecting on their meaning, which is very similar to contemplation. It is a kind of contemplation, really, and that mindfulness applied to the sutras can then give rise to these factors of awakening here. You think about it, you think, wow, this is really cool stuff. Maybe you don't think cool stuff, but something like that. And then you maybe get a bit of joy arising because you're thinking about the sutras. Think, wow, I got the Buddha as my teacher. Wow, that's amazing. This is just the best kind of spiritual teacher in the world, and this person is my teacher. Wow, that is just so marvelous. And then you reflect on these teachings, and you get joy and happiness because you are in the presence of these things, and it really lifts you up as a consequence. So this is another way of doing it. But the kind of normal way, the way that the sutras talk about usually, is the Satipatthanas and just the mindfulness of breathing that give rise to these things. So you understand when this is present. And when you don't have the awakening factor of mindfulness, I haven't got it. My mind is a bit muddled and all over the place or whatever, confused, as happens to everyone every now and again. Then, you're aware that you haven't got it. Very useful to be aware of these things, because then you know whether you have to prepare yourself more before you can meditate or whatever. You understand how the awakening factor of mindfulness that has not arisen comes to arise. And as we have said already, the main things that give rise to this is the 6 first factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. That is kind of the long-term strategy for giving rise to mindfulness. The short-term strategy is more like, sitting back, relaxing, and letting go a little bit in the present, and just enjoying your meditation here and now. That is a short-term. But unless the long-term factors, the first factors of the path, have been established, it's very difficult to even give rise to mindfulness in the short term, here and now. But both of these are important, long-term and short-term causes of mindfulness. And then you understand how the awakening factor of mindfulness that has arisen becomes fulfilled by development. Yeah? So you understand how the process of mindfulness of breathing, for example, how that strengthens the mindfulness. So there is a minimum kind of mindfulness that is required to meditate at all. And then there is the fact that mindfulness itself becomes stronger as you develop all the qualities of the mind, yeah? Samadhi, wisdom, and all of these things. It becomes even stronger, even more powerful. So until you become an arahant, I suppose, yeah, then you get the maximum mindfulness. Mindfulness is so strong. When you become an arahant, you don't have any, they're always there, it's always present. It means you can just go into a jhana state, bang, like that, snap of a finger, and you can go into a profound state of bliss and peace. So, there you are, yeah, fulfillment by development of the awakening factor of mindfulness. And let's go on to the other bojjhangas. I'm talking about them fairly briefly. So, we have the awakening factor, bojjhangas, of investigation of principles, of energy, the awakening factor of rapture, the awakening factor of tranquility, the awakening factor of stillness, the awakening factor of equanimity. And when that's in them, you understand, I have each of these awakening factors. Oh, mindfulness, I haven't really been paying proper attention here when I've been doing this. So what do all of these things mean? Let me just talk about it very briefly, because again, it's not enough time to really go into details. But so the investigation of principles, or investigation of dhammas, or you could say mental qualities, what this means is basically understanding the qualities of mind that are dark and bright, that are wholesome and unwholesome, that are blameworthy and blameless. This is how it is normally described in the suttas. Yeah? So you can see here, in other words, it's understanding the defiled states of mind and the pure states of mind. It is very similar to what we have been seeing all the way throughout Satipatthana, right? The 5 hindrances is precisely about that. And the bojjhangas that we're doing now, well, these are precisely the bright states of mind. So it's about the knowledge and investigation into inner qualities, and being able to divide your inner qualities into those that stop you from moving forward and those that enhance your ability to move forward on the path. Fully understanding what sensory desire and ill will, what these things really mean. Dullness and drowsiness, restlessness, and then the opposites. Yeah? This is that investigation. Dhamma vichaya, it is called in Pali. Vichaya means to investigate. And Dhamma here probably means something like mental qualities or mental phenomena. And you asked before, how do you investigate? And very often the investigation is almost automatic very often. Yeah, especially if you have a success in your meditation practice. You know that when you have a deep meditation, you come out afterwards, it will be very obvious to you that this is a wholesome state of mind. You can feel it because it feels wholesome, it feels pure, you can feel that you are mindful, you can feel that you are alive. You know that this is a state of mind that you would like to have more often, yeah, because it feels very pleasant. And you can see that there are certain things that are absent. Yeah, you can notice straight away that certain things are not there. You look back on the process, you can see, well, actually, all of these things were disappearing. Yeah, the senses were fading away. I couldn't really feel the body at that particular point of time. You can see that the mind was very pure, didn't have any of the normal kind of things that are going on in the mind. And so it's almost automatic. But you can enhance that a little bit by deliberately contemplating. Yeah, not just, yes, you will see it even if you don't contemplate, but you can deliberate a bit on what actually really happened here. Yeah, and then kind of make it more solid inside of you, so it kind of becomes more of a solid perception that you can use in the future to aid you in the process of meditation. So you kind of keep a clear record, if you like, of what happened during that good meditation session. But very often it is automatic, and you cannot really avoid the conclusion, the result, understanding what is wholesome and what isn't, by having these deep states of meditation. So that's the investigation of principles, yeah? Investigation of dark and bright, wholesome and unwholesome, blameworthy, blameless. Yeah. And as you investigate these principles, of course, the purpose of investigation is to gradually eliminate them completely. And the more you eliminate of the unwholesome qualities, the more energy comes. Energy is the next one here, the virya. Yeah? The virya is the natural energy of the mind, not the effort that we put in, but the natural energy where the mind feels automatically energetic. Yeah? I remember many years ago, I think I've mentioned this many times before, but many years ago I remember Ajahn Brahmali said that he used a very memorable simile for this. He said that when you have a really deep state of samadhi, that you feel like a nuclear reactor. And I thought, and it's kind of memorable, right? You don't forget that. I'm not sure exactly what that feels like, but you can imagine that being like a nuclear reactor, it sort of has a sense of very strong energy. It's a nice simile, and I kind of stuck in my mind. So energy, but natural energy, yeah? You don't have to create it anymore. And that sort of energy that you have at this point, it comes with other things. That energy is always conjoined with mindfulness. Yeah, you're always mindful when you have this kind of energy. It is not a restless energy, but it is a peaceful kind of energy. Yeah, it's the energy of the mind, which is kind of already you're getting fairly still at this particular point. Not super still, but fairly still. It's conjoined with mindfulness, also conjoined with a degree of happiness and joy at this point, gladness, pamodja, and these kind of expressions you find many places in the suttas. Mindfulness, pamodja, and energy are these qualities that kind of always come together. They come as a group, yeah? Mindfulness, energy, and joy, happiness. So you can see how this is very attractive, yeah? Really, really attractive. And you know it is attractive when you experience these things. And because energy comes with joy, then rapture is the next factor here. Energy and rapture. Piti is the rapture here. And energy is virya. Piti then emerges from that lower happiness, or you can say they come together because more energy comes with the rapture. Yeah. And this is where the mind starts to become you get a very powerful sense of happiness. Yeah, piti can be experienced in many different ways, but is often experienced as a kind of pleasure. High degree of pleasure can be felt as a pleasure going through the body. It is, of course, in the mind as well. Some people experience it more as a mental thing, some more as a physical thing. There's many different ways this can be experienced depending on how strong it is, on your personality, how you tend to experience the world. Some people are more in the head, some people are more have more kind of feel their body more. So it depends on your kind of personality and all of these kind of things. Yeah, so this is what these things are, and they kind of one of the points here is that they emerge from each other. So if you practice the first one, the second one emerges from the first one, the third one emerges from the second one, the fourth one from the third one. There's a causal linkage between all of these factors of awakening here. And then the background to this, of course, is often mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, as I said before, the mindfulness of breathing is in parallel. Has a very strong parallel to the 7 factors of awakening. So this is happening while you do your mindfulness of breathing. And as you practice the mindfulness of breathing, the rapture starts to calm down. You get tranquility, profound peace in the body. Yeah? And then eventually the profound peace in the body leads to a very deep stillness. And this is what is called samadhi. This is where the samadhi comes. Tranquility is passaddhi. Stillness is samadhi. And then if you develop that samadhi deeply enough, it ends up with what is called the equanimity, upekkha, which quite literally means like looking on is what upekkha means. The ability to look on without being disturbed. Yeah, it is like you are unperturbed. Imperturbability is one of the names that is used for the mind, which is very equanimous. You can just look upon anything and you can just see it for what it is, and that's why insight comes at this particular point, because you're able to see anything that you direct your mind towards. Anyway, so these are the awakening factors, right? And then in each case, you understand when you have them, when you don't have them, yeah, when they are missing, because you have familiarity with these things, and understanding these things allows you then to develop them in the right way. You understand how the equanimity factor that has not arisen comes to arise. What are the causes for the arising of this? What is the cause of arising for each one of this? And what are the causes? Well, the causes for each one of them is, first of all, the elimination of defilements that are standing in the way. The other cause for developing them is just doing the breath meditation. A third cause for the rising of these things may be an appropriate contemplation, such as recalling your virtue or generosity or something like that, or even just the Dhamma, as I mentioned before. All of these things kind of come together in this way. Can't go into too much detail now again. Then you understand how the awakening factor of equanimity that has arisen becomes fulfilled by development, how you keep on doing these things, and eventually it develops as a consequence. So that is the factors of awakening in brief. And they are very, very interesting things, because these are precisely the sort of things that I think we are on the spiritual path for. This is what makes life very interesting. And before we take a short break, I want to continue a little bit. I mentioned before that in the suttas we always find the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of awakening. They're often paired, they are kind of opposites. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of that, how they often work together in the suttas. So you have these 5 hindrances are destroyers of sight, vision and knowledge. They block wisdom, they're on the side of anguish, and they don't lead to nibbana. This is similar to what we find in one of my favorite suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya number 19, the 2 kinds of thought has a similar kind of expression in there. So they block wisdom, they're on the side of anguish. And they don't lead, actually it should be more like they lead away from nibbana, in my opinion. Destroyers of sight, visions, they're really bad, bad news. And even though they are so bad, still we indulge in these hindrances. Yay, sensual pleasures, hooray! Oh, so happy with these sensual pleasures. Anyway, so what 5? Sensual desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse and doubt. And then we have the opposite. These 7 awakening factors are creators of vision and knowledge. They grow wisdom. They are on the side of solace. And they lead to nibbana. The exact opposite. What 7? The awakening factor of mindfulness, investigation of principles, energy, rapture, tranquility, stillness, and equanimity. So here you can see this standard combination. Of course, in the elsewhere you see that you reduce the hindrances and the awakening factors kind of increase. They're almost like opposites. If you reduce the hindrances, then that in itself will cause the awakening factors to arise. Or you can do a more deliberate contemplation or development of the awakening factors, and if you do that, then the hindrances will reduce. So you can either focus on developing the factors of awakening, which will reduce the hindrances, or you can focus on reducing the hindrances, which will naturally increase the factors of awakening. So both ways go. And usually we do both together, and then the mind heads in the right direction. Here's another example. Monastics, please give up the 5 hindrances, the nivaranas, the corruptions of the heart that weaken wisdom, and truly develop the 7 awakening factors. Give up the hindrances, develop the factors of awakening. I love this expression, corruptions of the heart, that weaken wisdom. They are so they are bad. And I find this idea of weakening wisdom to be very powerful, because wisdom is what we all want. Wisdom is the highest kind of spiritual faculty. Wisdom is what enables us to live well, to make good choices in life. Wisdom is the thing that makes life truly meaningful. So anything that weakens wisdom is bound to be something truly terrible. So again, this kind of juxtaposition of 5 hindrances and 7 awakening. Here's another one. all the perfected ones, the fully awakened Buddhas, past, present, or future, give up the 5 hindrances, corruptions of the heart that weaken wisdom. Then, with a mind firmly established in the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, or the 4 Satipatthanas, they correctly develop the 7 factors of awakening here. So here we bring in the 4 Satipatthanas as well. So you give up the hindrances, and when you give them up, the mind becomes firmly established in the Satipatthanas. And this is a slightly different expression from what we have seen before. Firmly established, firmly here is su. In Pali, su means like well. Established, supatitita chitta. Patita means established, and firmly is su. I think I got that word right. I'm not entirely sure now. So this is a bit different because here we have already abandoned the hindrances. So we have a very strong establishment in the mindfulness meditation, the breath meditation, and then through that you develop the awakening factors. So it's a slightly different expression, but you can see the connection here between all of these things, in a similar kind of way. I'm just going through this fairly quickly, I hope you don't mind. And then what happens then? Well, they wake up to the supreme, perfect awakening as a consequence. All right, so let's take a short meditation break. Okay. Okay. So, any questions or comments from anyone here?
So, looking at the 7 awakening factors, when you have mindfulness and you investigate the principles, they'll get energy, rapture, tranquility and stillness, which is samadhi. So it's not saying that you get samadhi and then you contemplate. You can actually investigate while you're mindful, and that'll realize samadhi. So, and I'm just asking about the investigation of principles, whether that could be related to the 3 characteristics.
Yeah. Well, the thing about investigation, there's always kind of vipassana is always part of this whole process. Even to gain samadhi, you need to have some degree of investigation. This is what this shows you. Yeah, you have to understand the 5 hindrances in order to go beyond them. Yeah. So the point of investigation initially is to get you to samadhi. And then after samadhi, then the point of investigation becomes to understand things according to reality. There's almost like there's 2 slightly different stages, one leading to samadhi, one leading to deep insight. And all of that includes the 3 characteristics of impermanence, because you understand the absence of the hindrance, that's the impermanence of it. So you understand that it's gone. You understand the suffering inherent to these hindrances. So the 3 characteristics are always part of this. There's always kind of, to attain samadhi, it's useful to know the suffering inherent in the 5 senses and the body, because the more you understand that, the more easy it is to give up. You understand its impermanence, you understand the ability you have to let it go, so there's not something you have to hold on to. So these things are always they revolve around each other. And they're part of a similar kind of process. It's always useful, therefore, even if you haven't done the meditation all the way to deep samadhi, done some meditation, you have some success, then look back upon what happened. Why did I have success? Why am I happy now? Well, maybe because the body isn't so prominent anymore, right? Or the hindrances are gone, and you will see all of these things kind of disappearing, and how delightful it is when that happens. So all of this is part of that investigation process. All right. You want to take some online things? Yeah.
This one relates to something from the first session. Halo123 asks, how is, quote, do not get caught in the features and details, end quote, in sense restraint practiced? And what do features and details mean in that context?
I would recommend you to go back to when we did the 6th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. We have done all the previous factors before. They should all be available on the Buddhist Society website. Just search for them, because if I go into that, I'm just going to be a bit sidetracked. I'll try to keep to the Satipatthana for now, if you don't mind. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this one's from Venerable Karunika, so I'm not brave enough not to ask it. Dear Ajahn, what aspect of the 4 jhana states are considered as rupa? How can one do the post-jhana contemplation of rupa? And why are the first 4 jhanas called rupa jhana? And how are they related to the rupa loka?
Okay. This is one of those things that is it's very hard to know, to be honest with you, exactly what is meant there. But there's a certain aspect of the perception that remains in jhana, which relates to rupa. And I think it's one of those things that can only really fully understand it when you go into the arupa, or the immaterial attainments. Prior to that, it's actually very difficult to know what is meant by rupa in the jhanas, because essentially you have gone beyond the body. You have gone beyond almost all perception. All that remains really is bliss in those states. But there's still an aspect to them which is relates to the Rupa realm, and exactly what that is I think the only way you can really know that is by experiencing it and actually going beyond it. Did I answer that question fully? I hope so. Okay, yeah. That's it. Okay, well, that's great. Okay. Let's have a quick look at the last of the 5 contemplations, and then we will summarize a bit. So the last of the 5 is the contemplation of the 4 Noble Truths. Ding. Comparison of sources, as always. 1, 2, 3. Tick. Okay. So, as you can see, comparison sources yields that it's obviously in the Pali, because the Pali is our baseline, is always part of the Pali. And is also part of the Sariputta Abhidharma, which is the Abhidhamma of the Dharmaguptaka school of Buddhism. It's kind of quite a long way, and actually maybe not so far away, because Dharmaguptaka is said to be very close to the Pali Theravada school, so maybe not so far away. But all the other ones is missing everywhere, so you can be pretty sure that this is not really part of the original Satipatthana Sutta. Yeah, it's not really there. And it kind of makes sense, because when we talk about the 4 Noble Truths, especially how they are talked about in the suttas, it is almost always about insight, a deep insight into the nature of reality is what the 4 Noble Truths are. So let's have a look at how they are talked about in the suttas. How does a monastic meditate? Contemplating the 4 Noble Truths. It is when a monastic truly understands. Tick. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path, the practice that leads the cessation of suffering here. And this kind of contemplation, when you look at the suttas, what you find is that it is almost always found in connection with stream entry. Yeah? This is really a very profound contemplation, understanding things as they actually are, and it's really at the very end of the path. It's like a post-samadhi thing. Yeah? This is normally what this is about. So this really refers only to that, to stream entry. Of course, it is possible to contemplate it in a lesser form, but when you truly understand it in the right way, as is said here, stream entry is what it really refers to. So again, this really comes after samadhi. It does not fit so well here in the Satipatthana Sutta. It comes more Samma Samadhi, Samma Jnana, the 9th factor of the tenfold path. It fits very beautifully into the 9th factor of the tenfold path, but not so much into Samma Sati or Satipatthana. So it is not strange that it is not found in many sources. Yeah, it is it's a little bit of an odd one out here. And what is really curious is that when you go to the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, which is found in the Digha Nikaya, it expands on the 4 Noble Truths meditation here enormously. It's about 10 pages something, on the various aspects of the 4 Noble Truths that it talks about. So it has kind of become this enormous section in that sutta, when probably it doesn't originally may not even have been part of the sutta, which is kind of a bit paradoxical when you think about it. So there you are. So what does this mean, all of this? And what this means is that if we investigate this sutta carefully, and we try to track back to what was maybe what are the earliest parts of this sutta, or under Dhamma contemplation, it is the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of awakening here. And this makes good sense. We have seen how these 2 sets are very closely related to each other in the suttas. If you go to the Bojjhanga Samyutta, the connected discourses on the factors of awakening, very often you find the 5 hindrances mentioned together with the factors of awakening. Yeah, two sides of the same coin, essentially. So it makes very good sense that these should be mentioned here. And when you think about what they mean, they're both about going to samadhi. Yeah, the hindrances are precisely the things that block you from achieving samadhi. The bojjhangas are the factors that lead you on to samadhi. Yeah, in fact, the bojjhangas end with samadhi and equanimity. So they both have that characteristics of leading to samadhi, which is the main purpose of Satipatthana and Sammasati. So they both fit in very beautifully in the context of Satipatthana and how this leads to samadhi. And we shall see in a second that it also fit very well with the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing as well. So this is what it boils down to. Okay. Let's just have a look at this in complete contemplation of principles of Dhammas. Comparison of sources. So this is everything, all the various groupings coming together. So we have looked at each one individually, and here you can see all of them together. And you can see fairly clearly that the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of awakening, they kind of stand out. Yeah, number 1 and number 4 of the rows, they are found pretty much everywhere if we disregard the Prajna Paramita Sutta, whereas the other ones are more uncertain and probably unlikely to be part of that. Okay, so now what I would like to do now is to compare the contemplation of Dhammas, or principles, compare especially the hindrances, make a comparison between the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta, and see how they compare with each other. So let's see what that looks like. So Satipatthana versus Anapanasati Sutta. So we have the Satipatthana on the left, Anapanasati on the right. So we have just been through the Anapanasati Sutta, and we have seen, we've just been through the Satipatthana Sutta. We have seen how it involves understanding when the hindrance is there. When you have a ill will, you know I have ill will, etc. Understanding the absence of the hindrance when it's not there. Understanding how the hindrance arises, the causality behind these things. Understanding how the hindrance is given up, how taking away the causal factor leads to the ending of that particular hindrance. And understanding how the hindrance does not arise again in the future. So how does this compare with the Anapanasati Sutta, the mindfulness of breathing? So this is what the last tetrad of the Anapanasati Sutta looks like. So remember now, just to remind you, the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing has 16 steps. Each 4 times 4, 16 steps. And the first 4 are equivalent to the body contemplation. The second 4 are equivalent to the feeling contemplation. The third group of 4 equivalent to the mind contemplation. And the last group of 4, which we're looking at now, is equivalent to the Dhamma contemplation, the contemplation of principles. So what do we find in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta? This is the question. And what we find is that you practice breathing in observing impermanence. Anicca nupassana. The second thing we find is we practice breathing in observing fading away. What does fading away mean? Well, it means that it means like there's a gradual disappearance of something. When something fades away, it's like the gradual moving away from something. So, for example, the body. If the body is becoming less and less prominent as you meditate, which very often be the case, it's like the body is fading away, moving into the background rather than the foreground. Same thing can happen to the senses. Same thing can happen to the hindrances. things fading away. Whatever you're contemplating, fading away. And eventually, if you carry on fading away, there comes a point when it ceases. Practice breathing in, observing cessation. First of all, you see the impermanence, the anicca, the kind of moving of things. Then you see it moving in a particular direction, which is fading away, until eventually it ceases completely. And then the last one is you practice letting go. And this means patinissaga in the Pali, which basically means that you don't have any craving for this anymore. That's when it goes completely. This is one of the words you find in the third noble truth. The ending of craving is patinissaga. You're giving up craving completely. And so this means that you not only does it cease, but it never re-arise again in the future because the craving is gone. So this is what you find in the Anapanasati Sutra. So how do these things compare to each other? This is the question. What is the how do these things relate to each other? So let's find out. So understanding how an hindrance arises, well, that's really in the realm of impermanence. Things coming, things going, etc. Understanding how a hindrance is given up, this is part of the idea of fading away and cessation. When you give up the causes, then the hindrance fades away and it ceases eventually. And lastly, the hindrance does not arise again in the future. Well, that has to do with the patinissaga, the letting go of the hindrance. So this is what it looks like. So you can see there is quite a close connection here between the mindfulness of breathing, the insight part of mindfulness of breathing, and the contemplation of the hindrances. The only thing which is missing here is whether the presence of the hindrance and the absence of the hindrance. In other words, just the bare awareness of the hindrance. But it's kind of included, because you have to be aware of the hindrance to understand all of these other factors. So it's sort of part of it in any case. Although it's not explicitly stated in the mindfulness of breathing, it is sort of understood, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do these things. So quite a close connection there. Let's make it a bit more clear. It makes it a bit easier to understand when you see when it's colored, nicely colored. I like these colors. So and now, so that is the hindrances and the Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Now let's have a quick look at the awakening factors and mindfulness of breathing and see how that kind of works together. So now we're doing with the awakening factors. So we have Satipatthana, Anapanasati again. So you have the understanding the presence of the awakening factor, understanding the absence of the awakening factor, understanding the arising of the awakening factor, understanding how the awakening factor becomes fulfilled by development. It's a little bit not quite as clear how this relates to the Anapanasati, but let's have a look. So again, we have the four. You observe the impermanence of things, the fading away, the cessation, and finally the letting go. So how do these relate to each other? And roughly as follows. You have the arising and the fulfillment by development. Well, these are about impermanence. So they relate to the impermanence of the awakening factor. But obviously, because we're trying to build up this awakening factor, we're not actually looking for the cessation and letting go, etc. At least not yet. Down the track, we're looking for that even with the awakening factors, because down the track you want to let go of everything, even the samadhi states. But as we are building up, we're not really looking for that fading away and cessation of the awakening factor. So we can see from this that the 5 hindrances map very closely to the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. It is very clear how that maps onto it, whereas the awakening factor is a little bit less, not quite as strong, the mapping of one onto the other. It's a bit more weak, but there's enough there to get an idea how it actually works together. So, Satipatthana and Anapanasati. So there you are. That is quite a quick comparison of the two. What I would like to do now is to do a full comparison of the Satipatthana and Anapanasati, going back to the beginning and getting a feeling for how they actually relate to each other, stage by stage. Each of the 4 Satipatthanas, how it compares to each of the 4 tetrads of the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta. So that is the next one I would like to do. So we have all 4 Satipatthanas, how Satipatthana relates to Anapanasati. So Satipatthana, Anapanasati, 1 column each. We start with body contemplation, first of all. And if you remember back to the body contemplation, we had 6 kinds of body contemplation, and there was one we said that was really at the core of these body contemplations, one that is most likely to have been part of the most original Satipatthana Sutta, and that, of course, is the 31 parts of the body. And we also mentioned that the elements are fairly closely related to this, but the 31 parts of the body is like the epitome of the body contemplation, in the Satipatthana Sutta. So what about the Anapanasati Sutta? And we have looked at this before, but let's just bring it up again. So here we have the knowing of the heavy breath or the long breath, the knowing of the light breath or the short breath, the experiencing of the whole breath, and the calming of the breath. This is the Anapanasati Sutta. So this is how they compare to each other. And you may ask, maybe let's take them out for now. You may ask, how do these things actually relate to each other? What is the relationship between the 31 parts of the body and this way of watching the breath in Anapanasati? They're obviously, in some ways, they're quite different. One is an imaginary focus on the internal parts of your body, or some of the external parts as well. The other one is a breath contemplation. They're quite different in some ways. But they help each other and they support each other, these two practices. They're actually quite closely related to each other. So how do they build up together to form a more full understanding of what body contemplation is about? Well, first of all, if we look at the Anapanasati, first of all, the mindfulness of breathing here, one of the benefits of this practice, the way it is explained here, it gives a very clear sequence of development. You can see how there is a development of mindfulness. You have to start off with the basic mindfulness, which is just the knowing of the breath, whether it's light or heavy. Then it is an expansion of the awareness that allows you to know the whole breath. It is a more powerful kind of awareness. And then the awareness and the whole experience is calmed down. So it gives you a very clear idea of the process of meditation. That is not as obvious when it comes to the 31 parts of the body. But it tells us that when you contemplate the 31 parts of the body, it should lead to a similar kind of process. It should calm down. It should lead to a sharpening of the mindfulness and then a calming down of the experience. It tells you something. So these two, they throw light upon each other. And this is why I put this arrow going back and forth here. So what about the 31 parts of the body then? What is the point of that? And the point of that is that sometimes you do the Anapanasati and you find that maybe you're not making enough progress. You find that you have too much attachment to the body or whatever. And so very often the body contemplation is used here to overcome some of the defilements that block you from having access to Anapanasati, to mindfulness of breathing. So it is like a complement to the mindfulness of breathing here. You can say the mindfulness of breathing is the main kind of paradigm. This paradigm is this nice word, paradigm, for the meditation. And the body contemplation is like an additional way of helping you through that main meditation object. Yeah, it helps you to kind of undermine some of the problems that may exist there. So in this way, they work together. Yeah, one side is the main meditation. It shows you nicely how the process is supposed to work, and the other side gives you an additional way of undermining some of the defilements. Body contemplation in terms of 31 parts. The two working together, hand in hand, in tandem. So that is the body contemplation. Let's go on to the feeling contemplation. And the feeling contemplation before, we talked about the various kinds of feelings, pleasant, unpleasant. There's also neutral, but I left that out for now. And there was the distinction between spiritual and worldly. The worldly being the things coming through the five senses, the spiritual being the things that arise through spiritual practice. How does this compare to the Anapanasati again? So bring it up again. Experiencing rapture, experiencing bliss, experiencing these emotions, and calming these emotions. So again, you can see the advantage there of the Anapanasati is that it gives you a very clear framework for how to contemplate these feelings. They're contemplated via the experience of the breath. It gives you a very clear process that you have to go through, starting with experiencing a rapture, moving on to bliss, and then moving on eventually to the full experience, and then the calming of these emotions, the calming down. So the calming down is like one of the things that you see throughout the Anapanasati Sutta. This is one of the hallmarks of meditation. You see it here, you see it elsewhere. Calming, this is how you know that you are on the right track. Things are becoming more tranquil, more calm, more stilled. And the other thing that is one of the hallmarks of good progress in meditation is the feeling of pleasure is always increasing. It feels more and more blissful as you go through this process. Calming the breath is already very blissful, and then there is just more bliss with each stage here, as you can see, coming down. Each stage of bliss being more powerful than the previous one. So these are, in many ways, the two hallmarks you can look out for in a meditation practice, whether you are successful or not. Calm and pleasure. Deep pleasure and deep calm are the two things. And you can see this happening here. And then the feeling side, the Satipatthana side of things, they give you an idea of the things that you can contemplate, especially when you come out of your meditation, to notice the distinction between pleasant and unpleasant, spiritual and worldly. So you reflect back, you see the distinctions between these things, and then you understand where the mind should incline so as to avoid the problematic things in the world. You understand the problems with the worldly pleasures. You understand the problems with dukkha. You understand why dukkha is problematic, why pain is difficult. You understand this by looking at the positive experiencing instead. So the two, again, there's a complementing between the two, where the Anapanasati gives you the framework and gives you the process, one leading to another one, and the Satipatthana gives an idea of what to contemplate after coming out of the meditation. The things that you will notice coming out, which gives you then, guides you on what is really worthwhile. So the two of them kind of informing each other and notifying each other how they working together in this way. Mind contemplation. So here we have the main kind of characteristics is the defiled mind versus the undefiled mind, or the pure mind, if you like. We saw the various states of mind, basically the 5 hindrances, and then freedom from those 5 hindrances. And then we had the spiritual and worldly mental states. Here we have the mental states of the Mahagata Chitta, for example, and we have the Anuttara Chitta and etc. and the the Vimutta Chitta, I think it's called there, and the Samahita Chitta, so stilled mind, liberated mind, unsurpassed mind and the great mind, these kind of things. These are the spiritual versus the worldly states. And then we have the Anapanasati again, yeah? Experiencing the mind, gladdening the mind, stilling the mind, and freeing the mind. So again, we're seeing here a progress, yeah? Starting with experiencing the mind. What does that mean anyway, experience the mind? Well, what it means is that as your meditation deepens and as the five senses tend to fade away, the body fades away, the less there is of that outside world left, the more just remains of the inner world. And of course that inner world is precisely the experiencing of the mind. Yeah, the outer world disappears, what you're left with is the mind. That is experiencing the mind. And very often this is done through like experiencing a nimitta, yeah, the kind of lights in the mind and these kind of things. External world fading away, and what is left is this beautiful light within. And then you have the gradual purification of that by gladdening it, by stilling it, and ultimately freeing it into samadhi. This is where the deep samadhi happens, the jhana states and these kind of things. Yeah, so again, you see here the breath as the anchor. It is not obvious that the mind contemplation actually means in Satipatthana, but the Anapanasati Sutta gives you the breath as the anchoring experience that allows this process to happen in these stages. Yeah? And then you understand, as you do this, just as with the feelings, a very similar kind of thing that you find here, you understand the distinction between the pure and the defiled, the spiritual and the worldly. Often when you exit these things, it becomes very obvious that what a pure and defiled mind means once you have experienced these very deep states of samadhi. So it's kind of, if you look at that sequence there, you look at those two sequences, it's, you know, if you look at the Satipatthana sequence, it has 31 parts of the body. It has unpleasant feelings, worldly feelings, the defiled mind and the worldly mind. There's a lot of things there which are not particularly attractive. Yeah, the things that seem kind of, you know, actually downright unattractive, to be honest. And then you compare that to the Anapanasati Sutta, where everything is actually very, very attractive. It's all about bliss. It's all about tranquility. It's all about not only all about that, but an ever-increasing amount of these things, becoming more and more blissful, more and more tranquil. So, and I think this is a very important, again, message by the Buddha, that meditation, when it works in the right way, is a very, very pleasant experience. And we need to keep this in mind, because if we don't keep this in mind, that is where we end up, you know, focusing too much on the unpleasant aspects that you find in the Satipatthana Sutta. Thinking that, well, actually, I should be focusing on the pain in the body, or maybe even contemplate directly unpleasant mental states. But no, actually, it is sufficient to experience bliss. If you experience bliss, everything else falls into place as a consequence. Bliss makes you understand dukkha. Yeah, the more you understand the bliss, the more you understand all the unpleasant aspects of the world, because the bliss gives you the counterpoint. The bliss gives you the alternative that allows you to see the negative states of mind. It's kind of cool, isn't it? I really... I don't know. And it's not just... You may think that that this is kind of... maybe you think that, well, you know, okay, this is just the Anapanasati Sutta versus the Satipatthana Sutta, and maybe you think this is not as clear as it might be, but one of the things here is that if you know the way the Buddha describes meditation in the suttas, you know that the Anapanasati Sutta, the mindfulness of breathing, this kind of process is a very common process in the suttas. And I mentioned to you before what I call dependent liberation. Yeah? In dependent liberation, if you put that next to the Anapanasati, you will see again the process is almost exactly the same. The difference is that dependent liberation is something that you see in so many places in the sutta. It's one of the kind of core ways that the Buddha explains the process of meditation in the suttas. So how does dependent liberation go? Well, it goes something as follows. You have virtue, sila. From sila comes non-regret. From non-regret comes pamudja, which is gladness. From pamudja comes piti, which is rapture, what you see here. From rapture comes passaddhi, which is calm, which you also see here. From calm comes sukha, which you also see in Anapanasati. From sukha, the happiness, comes the samadhi, which you also see here through the freeing of the mind. Yeah? So the same kind of sequence. And that is what you might call the psychology of meditation. I sometimes call that, because it gives you the psychological experience of meditation when meditation works in the right way here. So it's very, very parallel to the Anapanasati Sutta, and it is one of the core kind of ways that the Buddha speaks about meditation practice. And then you have the 7 factors of awakening. Yeah, 7 factors of awakening, again, we have just seen, is a very similar kind of process going through. Yeah, you have the energy, the piti, the passaddhi, the samadhi, one after the other, rapture, calm, and stillness, and then equanimity. Yeah, one after the other. So this is very fundamental to the way the suttas present the Buddhist meditation. And Satipatthana here just gives you some additional information on how to use this in a way to gain a good understanding of what is happening and what is going on here. So Satipatthana Anapanasati, yeah? This is the first 12 factors of the Anapanasati, and the first 3 Satipatthanas being equivalent. And just very, very briefly, we go through the 4th Satipatthana once again. We just saw this before. Yeah, so there you are. This is exactly what we saw before, contemplation of the hindrances. So arising, giving up, future non-arising. I just put it together slightly differently. And then you have the contemplation of the awakening factors. Yeah, which is, again, gives you an idea for the last one. I've already talked about this sufficiently, so I'm going to leave that for now. So, quick summary of what we have been looking at. Gradual development of Satipatthana. Yeah, the 4 Satipatthanas are a gradual development. One comes after the other. They're not a simultaneous development. Body contemplation is the more basic. Then comes the feeling contemplation, then the mind, then the dhammas, the principles. And the way that can be seen very clearly is by looking at the Anapanasati Sutta, where everything is a very nice process, one thing leading to the next one. I haven't explained it in detail because that's not really the right time to do this now. But there's a lot more detail that can be looked at in terms of the Anapanasati Sutta and how that development actually happens. Satipatthana is gradual. One comes after the other one. Everything in the suttas tends to be gradual. This is best seen through the breath meditation, where you can see that sequence fairly clearly, how the development happens. Breath meditation is what holds all the Satipatthanas together and gives it a firm anchor. Yeah, so this is how we can be kind of sure that we are practicing meditation properly, because it is something that you can relate to quite easily, but it can be more difficult to relate to all of these feelings and mind state unless you have something that gives it a framework, and that's what the breath meditation is for. Yeah, and then comes the last point, that if we are not careful with understanding Satipatthana for what it is, if we make it less profound than what it is, if we think that contemplation of the mind, for example, just means being aware of mental states in daily life, or whatever it is that we do, if we don't fully understand the profundity of this, then it diminishes these practices. And when you diminish Satipatthana, then the consequence is that the rest of the path also tends to get diminished. So if we understand Satipatthana properly as meditation leading to samadhi, then we can start to get an idea of what real samadhi is about. So we don't want to diminish the samadhi and make it into jhana light or anything like that. And then if we diminish samadhi and satipatthana, then also the rest of the Dhamma also diminishes. Liberation itself becomes something less than what it actually is in the suttas. So it matters that we try to understand these things in the right way here. And if we don't, then we may end up with a problem as a consequence. And I hope that in the future we will be able to have a look at samadhi and also the very ending of the path as well, because this obviously is also very important. Don't know when that will be, but eventually down the track I want to finish off the course on the Noble Eightfold path and take it all the way to the very end. Okay, let's have another short 5-minute break of meditation. Okay, so we are getting quite close to the end. We can maybe take a few quick questions, Robin, if...
Venerable Karenika's got a question.
Thanks, Ajahn. I just wanted to clarify, in talking about the importance of bliss, the part of the Satipatthana Sutta where it talks about pleasant, neutral, unpleasant. So I'm thinking about it in a new way, as that's about experiencing what's pleasant after letting go in meditation, opposed to what's kind of pleasant in a mundane sense.
Yeah.
Is that how you're teaching it? Am I understanding how you're teaching it?
Letting go of, you mean, of ordinary pleasures and getting onto the spiritual. Is that what you,
I was thinking about it as once you've deepened into meditation and experienced the spiritual joys, the joys of letting go, that you come back and you reflect on that being what's pleasant,
right? Yeah.
And the absence of the body or absence of the regular experience we have in life as being pleasant, and maybe the unpleasant being what we're familiar with day to day. Is that?
So exactly. So that basically, once you have an experience of something more profound, like a spiritual happiness of samadhi or whatever, or even preliminary stages, you compare that to any happiness you have outside, like through the five senses, which would be the worldly happiness. And then you can see that there is a big difference, and that the worldly happiness is conjoined with craving and desires, which is very agitating and not all that pleasant because of all those negative qualities that come with it. Whereas the spiritual happiness, by its nature, has nothing to do with craving. There's no craving, there's no desire there. It's actually the exact opposite. It's the stillness of the mind. And the more you can contrast the two, and very often it's automatic because you're bound to see it. You experience something. It's like, you experience a nicer food. Well, you know that nicer food is better than the bad one you had before. You don't have to contemplate it all that much. It's just bleeding obvious, right? And it's the same thing with having a profound spiritual experience. You know that it's better. You have to know. But sometimes a little bit of contemplation can kind of make that insight deeper. It can make it more profound because you actually deliberately kind of noticing the difference. But that's exactly what it is about. And it's also understanding pain. I mean, it's obvious that pleasure is better than pain, right? It's pretty bleeding obvious. But at the same time, sometimes it's worthwhile really noticing that and making special note of it, how much problems the body actually throws at you. Even just sitting here now, there's always little things in the body. Kind of is never really entirely happy, this body. And just getting rid of the body, how nice that is, and when it's completely gone, and having this pure mental state without that kind of physical counterpart. So these are the things. And when we say contemplate, very often the contemplation is just you know because it's obvious. But on the other hand, we try to add a little bit to that. Try to notice the subtleties. Try to see things like hindrances. Try to kind of understand this from a Buddhist perspective in a deeper way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kind of extending what Conrad was talking about, when you had the comparison of the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati Suttas for the feeling, we always use the word feeling in the Satipatthana context, and then you used emotion in the Anapanasati. Was it intentional or is it kind of?
It's not. I've just grabbed the translation from other people. I haven't even. I've changed them a little bit, but I haven't changed them enough for that. No, but it's actually different words. So that's why there's different translations. So feeling is a translation of Vedana, whereas emotion here is actually a translation of Chitta Sankara. Chitta Sankara means the mental. In this case, Chitta Sankara usually is usually defined as feelings and perceptions in the suttas. Chitta Sankara, feeling and perception, are activities of the mind, we could call them, yeah, if you wanted to. And these activities of the mind are the feelings and perceptions of the mind. And feelings and perceptions at this point, well, they are basically emotions. Yeah, they're all the bliss and all of these kind of things. So they are. So that's why he translates them as emotions. Yeah. So it's interesting translation. And it's different from what you normally see. But it is. I don't think it's entirely wrong. And then you calm those emotions. Yeah, chitta sankarang patisambhati, which is the calming of the emotions and tranquilizing them. So it is a ballpark, but it's a bit unusual.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah.
So, to calm those emotions
Yeah.
in the mind, so you're in the feeling or in the mind part of the Anapanasati Sutta, how do you still the mind or still those emotions which are to do with your perception? So let's say your perception about jhanic states is fear or not knowing, so ignorance. So how do you then, because those perceptions come up, oh, something's coming up, and the mind, maybe it's not you, but the mind doesn't want to be still, it's a bit fluctuating because it doesn't know where it's going. So what do you do though? How do you still the mind and how do you get stillness of those emotions and perceptions?
You just hang out with the breath. Yeah. You don't hang out with those emotions, you hang out with the breath. So you go back to the breath and says, okay, and then everything kind of relaxes down. So the idea is just this is why it's so nice to have the Anapanasati as a kind of framework for the practice, because it means you have something you can come back to at all times when things get difficult. So come back to the breath. Okay, now my emotions are going haywire. Okay, back to the breath again.
1 step up, 2 steps back.
Something like that, yeah. So it's a bit, hopefully 2 steps forward, 1 back, not 2 back and 1 forward. You have a problem.
And this morning you had a slide saying the Deckless Element.
Yeah.
Would you be able to explain what that is?
Well, it's just nibbana basically. It's just a word for nibbana. It's just the ending of everything and the the ending of craving, etc. So yeah. Well, it's the Pali word is dhatu, and the meaning of this word is, it is element a precise description. I mean, I think I prefer property. The property of freedom from death is one translation. Yeah, the property of being free of death. That's kind of, it gives a different flavor than the deathless element. So deathless element sounds like some kind of thing, but the property of being free from death sounds quite different. So it gives you a different kind of angle on the same idea. Yeah.
Venerable Karunika has 2 questions.
Venerable Karunika has a question. Okay, well, I can't say no to Venerable Karunika, so please fire away.
Nobody can say no to her, that's fine.
Okay.
In the Vibhanga Sutta, SN 47.40, Buddha makes a distinction between the establishment of mindfulness, Satipatthana, and the development of this establishment of mindfulness, Satipatthana Bhavana. Can you kindly explain the significance of making this distinction?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, the development there it refers to the origination, vanishing, and origination and passing away. I think that's how it is defined there. If I remember correctly, it's one of the very few suttas where it actually talks about the origination, origination, vanishing, and both. So what is the distinction? Well, I would say the distinction here probably is that maybe, and I must admit this is a kind of tricky area, because sometimes the development just means the actual Satipatthana itself. And if it means Satipatthana itself, then there isn't really much of a distinction there. So the development is the thing itself. But otherwise, you can possibly regard it as one thing being more preliminary than the other. So the Satipatthana could be the samatha practice you do first, and the development then could then be the further application of Satipatthana after samadhi, after the calming of the mind. That would be one way of doing it. But I think what you would have to do to investigate that properly is to actually look at how the word development, the word development here is bhavana, I think, in Pali, how that is used in connection with other Dhamma sets? How was it used in connection with the Noble Eightfold Path? How was it used in connection with the Iddhipadas? How was it used in connection with the 5 Indriyas? To get a feeling for what it actually means in the context of Satipatthana, whether it actually is a different thing or not. It could be that here it refers to the last one, the Dhammanupassana, but again, I'm just it's a tricky one, and I'm not entirely sure, but maybe I can get back to that one later on when we have a chance.
Second question.
Yeah.
It seems to me that at least the samudaya and vaya aspects that come up for contemplation after each satipatthana practice in the refrain part of the sutta is very critical, even though you said that the refrain is a later addition. Therefore, do you agree that this part of practice is important regardless of the results of the text critical studies?
I think it is certainly important when it comes to the last of the 4 satipatthanas, because that is specifically about those things. Yeah? As we have seen, it is kind of integrated into the very formulas for the hindrances and the bojjhangas, the idea of arising and passing away and understanding the causality here. So I think, yes, it is very important there, and I think it is probably to some extent important in the previous ones as well, because you want to understand the mind, you want to understand the arising of things, why they're there, why they are problematic. There's some degree to which that is true. It is part of it, but it becomes particularly important in the last one, because the last one is where you are dealing with the very refined aspects of mind, and you want to eliminate the refined things. So you have to kind of understand something which is usually not understood. I mean, a large part of our mental content, we understand automatically why, you have certain problems. It's easier to understand, but for the really profound stuff, actually we're not used to reflecting on it properly, or seeing it even, and so we don't really understand it because we're not used to thinking about it. So there it becomes more important. For the earlier satipatthanas, it's still important, but it really comes into focus, I think, on the very last one. Okay, so let's come to the very conclusion of the Satipatthana Sutta, and we don't have much time, so I'll just speak faster than usual. We come to the conclusion of the Satipatthana Sutta. This is the very last paragraph at the very end of the Satipatthana Sutta. Yeah? And this is what it looks like. If you develop these 4 applications of mindfulness in this way for 7 years, you can expect 1 of 2 results. 7 years sounds like a long time, but actually, maybe not. So, what are the 2 results you can expect? Awakening in the present life, or if there's anything left over, non-return. Yeah? Anagami, full awakening, arahant to anagami. Yeah? So that's kind of nice, yeah? If you practice these things all the way, you can expect awakening in this life, or if there's anything left, you can have non-returner. Or anything else. A lot of people will settle with stream entry, I'm sure. It's good not to be too greedy about these attainments. So here you can see that obviously here we are including samadhi. The samadhi comes through in the 7 factors of awakening, yeah, as part of this process. And then when you include the samadhi into the Satipatthana Sutta, this is what you can expect. So it's pretty good, right? So then comes it goes further, let alone 7 years. If you develop these 4 applications of mindfulness in this way for 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, 1 month. Sounds good, right? A fortnight, let alone a fortnight. Anyone who develops these 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation in this way for 7 days can expect 1 of 2 results. Awakening in this life, or if there's anything left over, non-return. So you just got to get into it, right? 7 days. 7 days. So what does this mean? What are we supposed to understand from this? What it means, right? You notice there, if you develop the 7 factors of awakening, 7 applications of mindfulness in this way, right? So in this way, in other words, all 4, taking them all the way to samadhi, all the way to equanimity, all the awakening factors, well, if you develop all of that, then it can happen very fast, right? And I think this is kind of the message here. The message here is that it will vary enormously depending on the person. It will depend enormously on how profound your mind already is. If you already have the 4 jhanas, then of course the whole thing can happen in 7 days because you are already on the cusp of these things happening. So we have to be, when you see these things, we have to kind of be very careful with the interpretation. It doesn't mean that it is super easy to become an arahant or a non-returner. It just means that when the qualities of mind are present, then these things can happen very fast. Why? Because all the conditions are there. But anyway, I guess the other question is, well, how authentic is this anyway? This is like a conclusion statement, and I'm always interested in authenticity. How far does it go back? And I know that Bhante Sujata, when he did his study of the sutta, he did not include this part as an aspect of the original sutta. He left it out. So he reckons it may have been something that was added over time, and come to be part of this. In fact, this kind of statement of something happening 7 years, 6 years, 4 years, is something that you find in a few different places in the suttas, and it's used in a similar way to also explain other aspects of the practicing of the path. So it seems to be something which is kind of, may have been taken from elsewhere and maybe added to the sutta at some point, if it isn't really an authentic part of it. Because it is a bit strange. What does it exactly mean to do this in this way for 7 years? It's a bit kind of imprecise to really pin it down properly, to know what it actually means. But there is one thing which is kind of interesting about this, and you may not have picked up on that, but I will show you what this is, and it's kind of strange. I should say, by the way, that one of the other suttas, it doesn't stop at 7 days. It then goes to 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, and I think it ends up with, if you start in the morning, you end up in the evening. 2 results can be expected: arahant or non-return. So you can see how there tends to be this kind of things get more and more extreme over time, and kind of things get added to the sutta, and you start to wonder then, well, if this was originally part, what did it say originally? Maybe it only said 7 years, and that was it. And then gradually there was a kind of this inflation, so to speak, in qualities. So it gives you a little bit of uncertainty about what's going on. But what is interesting here is this. Notice the number 7 there. It's kind of strange. Why does it start with let alone 7 years, and then it goes down to 1 year, and suddenly it jumps from 1 year to 7 months, and it goes down from 7 months all the way down to 7 days, and it stops at 7 days? Why is that? What has this number 7 got to do with it? After 1 year, shouldn't it be 11 months, 10 months? Why begin at 7 years? Why end at 7 days? And this is kind of... It's curious, because there isn't anything. What is it about the number 7 that makes it so special? 7 years, okay. What about 8? What's wrong with 8 years? Or what's going on here? And one of the things about the number 7, and this is something. Again, this is one of the things about mythology. The number 7 is a very important number in mythology. If you go to the internet and you look up the Wikipedia article or look up articles on numerology and mythology, they said there is 2 numbers specifically that have a very spiritual significance. One of them is the number 3, and you can see that in the 3 triple gem perhaps, and the other one is the number 7. It's a very important mythological number. It kind of corresponds to completeness. You have the 7 days of the week and all of these kind of things. So I don't know. This is just pure speculation on my mind, and I love a bit of speculation. And I wonder whether that number 7 is here precisely because it has a kind of spiritual mythological significance, whereby the people of ancient India, they would be able to relate to the number 7 as something slightly spiritual in its own right, slightly mythological, that empowers, gives extra power to the number 7. And that may be why it stands out in the sutta in this way. Because if you want to make an impact on your audience, then many things that can make an impact on the audience, but if you are steeped in a certain mythology, and we're all steeped in a mythology in certain ways, mythology is part of a human experience across all cultures, across all history. Because of that steepness in a certain mythology, these numbers will have a certain power over your mind when you hear them. You hear the number 7, whoa, okay, it has a certain power on you. So maybe that is what is going on here. Of course, the Buddha normally doesn't use mythology in this way to make a point. That's not usually how the Buddha works. The Buddha is usually the suttas tend to be very rational in the way they present things. So maybe this is another sign that this is a later addition. This idea that the number 7 becomes prominent. That this would have been a thing that an editor of the sutta would have added later on. And why these numbers suddenly become prominent in this way. Maybe. I admit this is pure speculation on my part. But I hope you please forgive me for being speculative, but sometimes I don't think there is much alternative than speculation. So, okay. So let me just finish off the end of the sutta. The 4 applications of mindfulness are the path to convergence, or to oneness. They are in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and sadness, to end the cycle of suffering, and to realize extinguishment. That's what I said, and this is why I said it. Now, this is just a summary of what the Buddha said in the beginning. Same thing that we saw in the very beginning of the sutta, we're here seeing at the end as well, a summary of everything. And then comes the very last sentence in the suttas. You know what that is? That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the monastics were happy with what the Buddha had said. This is a standard ending of the suttas, where the monks, the nuns, the lay people present, they rejoice in the sutta exposition given by the Buddha. There's only one sutta where the Buddha monks were not satisfied. There's a famous sutta where it ends off, the monks were not satisfied with what the Buddha said. And this is in the first sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Mulapariyaya Sutta. And the reason for that is because apparently the monks were really conceited, and the Buddha kind of punctured their conceit, and they were kind of grumbling afterwards and were not happy with what the Buddha had said. But that is only one experience. Normally, everyone is very satisfied after hearing a sutta. So, let's go through the summary of the entire course. I'm just going to very quickly summarize what we have looked at. And so, to understand Satipatthana, you need to read the suttas widely. We have seen at the beginning how there is a tendency to focus too much on the Satipatthana Sutta, and at the expense of all the other suttas that talk about Satipatthana. There's a focus on the sutta itself, but really, if you want to understand it fully, you have to have a broad reading of the suttas. Not only do you need a broad reading of the suttas, but you need to take into account other schools, because these are the ancient schools, and they are no different from the Pali, really, because they also come from the Buddha originally. And when you take all of these things into account, that is when you get a full understanding of what Satipatthana is about. It's a very important principle in general. The second point is that morality and right view are what enable Satipatthana practice. These are the conditions that are required. And this is a very important point. You can't just practice mindfulness and think that by being mindful you're going to become more mindful. No, what gives rise to Satipatthana, gives rise to mindfulness, is morality in particular. Be kind. Morality can be summarized in a single word: be kind. Don't do the bad things. Do the good things. Don't think the bad things. Think the good things. That is what morality or sila is in a nutshell throughout the suttas. So important. Yeah? And if you do this consistently, over time, purifying yourself, I guarantee you that will give rise to mindfulness. And it's very obvious why. Because if you are moral, in a deep sense, you will feel good about yourself. And because you feel good about yourself, you want to be present. You don't want to be fantasizing about the past or the future or whatever. So it gives rise to these things. The other thing here is right view. And right view, really what that is about is understanding where happiness is to be found in the world and where suffering is to be found in the world. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Yeah? Understanding this distinction between happiness and suffering and where it is to be found. We tend to look for happiness in places that actually cause us suffering. This is why it is so problematic. This is why we carry on life after life, always roaming around in the samsaric journey, never finding satisfaction, always looking in the wrong place. So understanding this distinction is really what this right view ultimately is about. And if you understand that distinction, it becomes very easy to meditate because you understand this is where I find happiness. This is where that moves me towards samadhi and all of these kind of things. And because you know that all the senses can do to you is to give you more suffering and problems, you abandon them. Yeah? You are not interested in those five senses anymore. Gradually moving away from them, understanding that the war between Russia and Ukraine ultimately is a five-sense experience. It only exists in the five senses. In meditation, there's no war between Russia and Ukraine. Right? Yeah. And that's kind of an important insight because all of that belongs to the five-sense experience. So you understand that experience is always going to be problematic. You move in. This is part of right view. Understanding that distinction enables meditation very powerfully. So these are core things that these are the kind of root things that enable Satipatthana. Satipatthana is about meditation, which requires mindfulness. So you have to have mindfulness established first, and when mindfulness is established, then you can do meditation practice. Mindfulness is not something you develop through meditation. Mindfulness is something you develop through the first 6 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, specifically morality and right view. Then, when mindfulness is established, you practice meditation utilizing the mindfulness that you have. Satipatthana develops samatha and vipassana, leading to samadhi. So, when you do Satipatthana practice, mindfulness of breathing, 2 results always come together. Samatha, calm, vipassana, clear seeing. You see things more clearly. You understand dukkha more clearly. You understand impermanence more clearly. Yeah? At the same time, you also have more calm. The deeper the calm is, the greater the clear seeing. The greater the clear seeing, the deeper the calm. These things are 2 sides of the same coin. I've talked about this before, but I think you will understand why that is the case. And as you develop samatha and vipassana together in this way, eventually it leads you all the way to samadhi, the unification of the mind, yeah, the 4 jhanas and all of these kind of things. Gradually, through this process of mindfulness of breathing that we have just seen. Because the breath meditation is the main sutta approach to all Satipatthana practice. Yeah, this is how the suttas say specifically that you fulfill the 4 satipatthanas through the breath meditation. So because that's the main approach, that is, I think, what we should focus on as practitioners if you want to follow the word of the Buddha properly. Satipatthana and samadhi together, in the end, this is what bring about awakening here. Yeah, these two things together lead Satipatthana, leading to samadhi, and then that samadhi, imbued with all the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, that is how awakening comes about. Right view plus samadhi. This is what happens. And we are soon going to get kicked out of this room, so for that reason, we come to the end. Okay. Sadhu. Sadhu. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much everyone for coming. Thank you very much for the people who have been organizing all of this. And some of those people are absent and not here, but some of the main organizers have been people like Lehar and the AV teams with have all been supporting this. And over the recently we have had the fortunate support of Robin, who's been stepping in when Lehar had to go to Singapore. And all those people I've forgotten about, I don't know who, there's probably a lot of people involved behind the scenes, and of course every one of you, and myself included. Okay, excellent. So that is all for now. The intention is someday to finish off this course and to do the last factors of the Noble Eightfold Path as well. We'll see what happens. The future, as always, is uncertain, but with a bit of with things going the way I am hoping they will go, then we might be able to do that eventually. That's kind of the idea. So all for now, take care everyone, look after yourself, practice the path well, do all the right things, and then you will have great success in your meditation and the whole practice of the Buddhist path. So let's end off by paying respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha.